Welcome to Beyond the Powerline Road. Interesting little comment from an individual this week. They were saying that they thought the Bible did not mention much about parents raising children. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, I could kind of see where they're coming from, but not really. And so I just kind of want to mention one little thing in the Old Testament, and then I'm going to go to the New Testament and talk about how parents should consider raising their child. And so in the Old Testament, in Proverbs, you have heard, and you've heard it misquoted many times, you've heard the spare the rod, spoil the child, but that definitely is not the verbiage in the Bible. The Bible says that one who does not use a rod hates his child or hates his son. And what's interesting is I wanted to make sure that the Bibles were kind of in agreement with this. So I went to the New King James Version, and I went to the American Standard Version, and I went to the Christian Standard Version, English Standard, the NIV, the Geneva Bible, the New American Bible, the New Catholic Bible, and the, what was the other one I went to? The Revised Standard Version. And every one of them, at one way or another, says if you do not discipline your child, you hate them. And kind of if you think about it, and I've seen this pretty much in school a lot, the children that are problematic, the children that struggle or use foul language and things like that, hey, guess what? They learn from mom and dad. I remember years and years ago, I had a student that just could not stop using foul language every time he said something. And so I called his dad. And I said, I need to talk to you about your child's language. And the dad started out with, well, what in the blankety 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 blank is wrong with my son's language? And I said, sir, that's fine. I understand the situation now. I don't need to discuss anymore. He goes, well, why in the blankety blank did you call? And I said, that's fine, and I hung up. The people who expect schools to raise their children do not follow a biblical principle. And so basically the biblical principle we're going to look at is in 1 Timothy. And when we look at 1 Timothy 3 and chapter 4, the biblical principle we'll actually look at is the directions of raising or having an individual that wants to be a bishop or an overseer or an elder. And so what happens is when you have individuals that are looking to be church leaders, and if you look at one version to the next, one version revised, many versions, Revised Standard Version, New King James Version, New Catholic Version, King James Version, American Standard Version refers to bishop, overseer, and I think I got American Standard Version in the wrong place. The English Standard Version, the World English Version, the New International Version, the New American Standard refer to that individual as an overseer, and International Standard Version, along with, easy to read version, ERV, and a few others, refer to the individual as an elder. So it's the same individual. Some Bibles refer to them as a bishop. Some Bibles refer to them as an overseer. Some Bibles refer to them as an elder. But what it refers to is an individual that wants to be, or what is put in the place of leadership in a church community. And when you read this, we are talking about somebody that wants to be an elder or a bishop, but at the same time, this really talks about how to raise children. And so what it says, and I'm just going to read the whole thing, and then I'm going to come back and beat on certain points. It says the saying is true. If anyone desires the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become pulled up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. So we're looking at individuals that want to be a bishop or an elder, synonymous terms. And what happens is, I used to belong to a church group before I studied the Bible that thought that bishops should not be married. And the interesting thing is if we go about 120 more words into the First Timothy, we will get to chapter 4. And in chapter 4, what it says is that now the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, through the insincerity of liars, whose conscience is seared, who forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that God created. So what is kind of interesting is there are church groups that require abstinence from food. Now, if a preacher would get up there and say, hey, red meat is not really good for you, I would suggest that you have fish on Fridays or something. That is one thing. But when it's required, then according to the book of Timothy that Paul wrote, it is the teaching of deceitful spirits and demons. But I want to really get back to chapter 3. So we're talking about an individual that wants to be a leader in the church. But I want to talk about an individual that wants to raise children properly. First and foremost, in order to raise children properly, you must be above reproach. And you must be sober-minded and self-controlled and respectable and hospitable, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle. Listen to this, not violent but gentle. An individual that beats their child every time that they make a mistake is a violent individual, and that is not acceptable. Now, at the same time, a child that does wrong must be punished, must be redirected, must be taught to do that which is right. We are not our children's best friends. We are their parents. So if we continue on, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, he must manage his household well. In other words, managing the household well goes into the next part, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. When we're looking at submissive here, we're looking at being respectful. We're looking at children that will not smart off at their parents, that will not carry on in public, and the parent, and in this case, because we're talking about dads, needs to be able to keep the child in control with all dignity. In other words, if a parent starts screaming at their child in the middle of Safeway store because that child is misbehaving, there's no dignity there. So, maybe a little swat on the rear, maybe redirecting the child, maybe taking the toy away from the child, something to redirect the behavior of the child is understandable. But if we remember what it says is that the parent must be gentle. And that is about 2 verses up. And if someone does not know how to manage their own household, how will they take care of God's church? You know, it makes sense that people with children, men with children, are required to be in control of the church, because if you know how to raise your child from an infant, if you know how to care for them, if you know how to handle them when they are a teenager, you can handle God's people when they are struggling. And of course it goes on and it says he must not be a recent convert and all that, but please look back through this if you ever want to see how a person should raise children. They should be hospitable. They should not be brutish. They should not be a drunkard. They should not be violent. They should be able to manage their children and still keep their dignity about them. They can't just all of a sudden go off on a tangent and start verbally abusing their children by calling them all sorts of names. So, if you ever see someone that may need help or ask for help for raising children, and I'll tell you what, we all make mistakes. Every one of us has made mistakes. There has been no perfect parent ever. But go to 1 Timothy chapter 3. Look at the directions of the family man that wants to be a leader of the church, and it will give you a very good idea of what you should do in order to raise children. Have a wonderful day.